For starters, could you discuss the controversy over the award, the Janusz Korczak Award from the ADL for your book, Did the Children Cry?
I'd be glad to. Did the Children Cry came out in about 1994, as I recall, and the book was well reviewed by most historians, and unbeknownst to me, my publisher had submitted it for the Janusz Korczak Award. I was very flattered because I'm a big admirer of Janusz Korczak. He really combined the best of two worlds. He was very proud of his Jewish heritage, and he was also very proud of his Polish citizenship. As a matter of fact, during the war, he used to walk around in his Polish army uniform to the great chagrin of his friends and colleagues, and of course annoyance of the Nazis. The award was submitted, the submission was in the hands of a committee, literary committee, appointed by the leadership of the ADL. And that committee, I learned, was composed of both Jewish and non-Jewish judges. These are people who are very prominent in their fields. And they voted that I should receive the award. I learned later that it was a highly competitive award. There were numerous submissions for this very prestigious national award. I was informed that I was the winner, and my wife and I were making plans to go to New York City to receive it in a formal ceremony. And several weeks later, I learned that the award had been rescinded. And it had been rescinded by the political leadership of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. At that point, I urged that they reconsider, that this was highly irregular, that it damaged me professionally because the publicity was already out on concerning my receipt of the award. And I received a letter from the political leadership that they would not grant me the award. At that point, I sought legal counsel. And meanwhile, there had been a great deal of publicity about this that had leaked out from various sources. And I received a great deal of support from both Jewish and non-Jewish scholars, literary people, and so on. As a matter of fact, one name that comes to mind here quite readily is Joseph Kuchaba, who had done a program on children of the Holocaust. And he was outraged, and he said that it had really damaged Polish-Jewish relations beyond damaging me, and he urged the political leadership of the organization to reconsider. I had several organizations that were on my side, as it were. The Kosciuszko Foundation, which is based in New York City, lent its support, and its metropolitan chapter in New York was especially supportive and active on my behalf. The Catholic League got involved in this. One thing I did notice, and of course this is true of any kind of controversy or problem that scholars encounter, there were some people that I expected to go public and support me, and they were noticeably reticent. Not that they were not supportive, they did that privately, but simply would not go public with it. And that's, you know, courage is something that's very rare, I think, in people, and it's got to be applauded when it's exhibited. And these people who did come out, many of them took some real risks in doing so. The long and the short of it was that early in 1996, after all this pressure had been exerted on the ADL, they reversed themselves again and granted me the award. However, they did it in a manner that was really unbecoming to any organization of that stature. They simply sent the award through the mail. There was no ceremony, and that was the end of the matter as far as they were concerned.
Why was it rescinded? What was the logic for that?
The reason that I understood from the ADL political leadership was that I did not talk enough about Polish anti-Semitism. That's basically in a nutshell. The book was not about anti-Semitism. The book was about children, Polish and Jewish children, and the experiences that they shared and the tragedies that they endured. And it was really an uplifting book because there was a positive end to all of this. I dwelled on kids who managed to survive these horrific conditions and survived and were able to lead happy and fairly well-adjusted lives afterwards. That was really the theme of the book. And, excuse me, and anti-Semitism was not the issue in any instance. And it's the same issue that is usually focused upon by many Holocaust historians, that those of us who get into this area don't talk enough about Polish anti-Semitism. And I'd like to get into that in a little more detail later on.
Definitely. Here, this question you sort of framed in the emails. Why did you write the article that later appeared in Polanski's book about the selling of the Holocaust? And I asked, what are the issues at stake in all this?
Well, the article that subsequently appeared in Professor Polanski's book first appeared in a Polish-American newspaper. I did the article in response to having read Jan Gross's book, Neighbors. Little did I know that it would generate so much interest, and as it turned out, I might note the fact that in addition to Professor Polanski asking my permission to have it reprinted in his anthology, a publication published in Rome called Inside the Vatican expressed a great deal of interest in it, and they featured it in one of their issues. And I might note parenthetically here that I got a tremendous response from readers of Inside the Vatican, because this is a publication that reaches across the globe. And I had letters from people all over the place, in Scandinavia, Western Europe, Central Europe, and even as far away as Australia and New Zealand, who were very positive in their response to my article and pointed out their agreement with much, if not all of it. Now, as I said, what provoked this article was I read Jan Gross's Neighbors, and I was really very upset with it because it was really not history. It was more of a sensationalist journalistic account of this unfortunate event that occurred in Jedwabne. And to put it very methodically here was a book in which he claimed, with great hyperbole, that in that village, half of the village, the Polish half, attacked the Jewish half. He pegged Jewish casualties at 1,600 people. I looked at his documentation, and he had no German sources that could substantiate any of this. And he led the reader to believe that this was some sort of a spontaneous upheaval on the part of anti-Semitic Poles who had no leadership or nudging from the Germans, and let one believe that it was the entire Polish part of that village. The methodology, the exaggeration, was really beyond me, and I didn't understand how a major University Press, Princeton, could publish a work like that. And what was even more amazing to me was how many mainstream Holocaust writers endorsed it as legitimate, sound history. It violated all of the criteria of good scholarship. And that really got me quite inflamed, quite angry. And hence it led to the article. I was very disturbed in the sense that when you have mainstream Holocaust writers not able to distinguish between sound scholarship and good scholarship, I think we're in trouble here when it comes to interpreting the relations between Poles and Jews during the war. And I think it also shows the narrowness, the parochialness of many of these Holocaust writers whose focus is entirely on the Jewish experience and their inability, or seeming inability, to understand something very elemental here, that the Nazis committed genocide against many people, the Gypsies, the Poles, and other Slavs. And if you want to understand that era, you've got to understand these other genocides and their relationship to each other. And this is my principal disagreement, my principal argument with many Holocaust writers who are so narrow in their understanding or narrow in their scope. For example, Timothy Snyder, a distinguished historian at Yale University, recently published a book which I think is a tour de force. It's called Bloodlands. And he, in an article in the New York Review of Books, mentioned that one historian, for example, who is in the mainstream of Holocaust writers, Christopher Browning of the University of North Carolina, made the statement that the whole purpose of the Polish underground was to exterminate Jewish life in Poland, so there would be no remnants of it after the war. Well, of course, that statement is absolutely absurd. It's horrendously wrong. I really lack the adjectives to deplore such a remark. If one knows anything about the Polish underground, its whole purpose was to fight the Nazis. There was nothing in the makeup, the complexion, or the purpose of the Polish underground would lend itself to this kind of preposterous statement. And this is what I mean. You've got distinguished historians who dub themselves Holocaust historians who come out with statements like that, and it shows that they know very little about the Polish underground, the Polish people, and what they were going through at the time. Now, if a historian of that caliber can make a remark like that today, with all of the literature that we have mountains of literature on this era, then I think this particular branch of history is in serious trouble.
You'd said in an article about political, ideological, and economic purposes that exploiting the Holocaust for those reasons, political, economic, ideological purposes, I guess that alludes to Finkelstein and some of his things. Do you have any further commentary on that?
No, I think that there's a lot of truth in that. I think that there are opportunists out there who have exploited this edifice that we have, and there's money to be made. There are reputations to be garnered by publishing in this area, and rather irresponsibly. There's quite a contrast between what Jan Gross had done as a respected scholar years ago and now the trash that he comes out with in Neighbors.
What you said there too, I mean, if you don't, if you decide you just pass, we don't, but this is all important stuff, and you said to have a book in the same article, to have a book published by a major publisher on the Holocaust, the author must meet only a few criteria. Then you go on, does the book depict Jewish victimization in pristine terms? Nothing negative or compromising about Jewish behavior, etc. Could you elaborate on that, because it's important?
Yeah. Well, yes, I think that the difficulties of historians who write on subjects that do not depict Jews only during the Holocaust, but who deal with non-Jewish tragedies, or who place, for example, in my case, the Poles in a more favorable light than they've been depicted in traditional Holocaust historiography. It has, though these individuals have enormous problems, because the major publishers and the major venues in the Eastern Seaboard, like the New York Times, for example, tend to be very pro-Jewish, and they will not even review books that are that deviate from the established truth of the Holocaust. I have a personal example. New York Times. The New York Times, despite the fact that my book, The Forgotten Holocaust, was well reviewed by most historians, received excellent reviews in the major historical journals in this country and abroad. For example, the very prestigious Polin journal that's published by the Institute of Jewish Polish Studies at Oxford. The reviewer there was very favorably disposed to what I had written there. Yet the New York Times refused to review it. And let me just add a little insight here. I have, or had at the time, a contact within the New York Times. And I wrote this individual and I said, why hasn't the New York Times gotten behind this book in the sense of just simply reviewing it? That's what they're supposed to do. If a book is controversial, then that's what they should be doing. They're in the business of this, not endorsing or not endorsing, as the case may be, a particular book. And this individual wrote me back, and I have to keep this person's name confidential, or else they'll lose their position at the New York Times. The individual stated that upon discussion with the editors at the time, now we're talking 1986, 87 now, but things haven't changed since, that my book was too sympathetic to the Poles. There wasn't enough said about Polish anti-Semitism. It's the same thing, the same mantra that's recited with nauseating regularity by these people. So it never was reviewed, despite the fact, now, okay, let's advance so many years. The book has undergone numerous printings, 2 major editions, paperback editions, and a Polish edition which sold out, incidentally. Even in the revised edition of 1997, a copy was submitted by my publisher. Again, the New York Times conspicuously avoided reviewing it. However, on the other side, I must say that the New York Review of Books pursued a different policy. Virtually all of my books that I can think of have been reviewed by reviewers in the New York Review, and I might note, parenthetically again, received good reviews.
Do you have any further speculation or knowledge of this kind of wall about how the Holocaust must be depicted and who's at fault and who's not? It's very difficult, as you're saying, to penetrate that.
Absolutely, it's very difficult to penetrate. I think there's sort of an established truth, if you will, that people who challenge it are just simply don't have any much success. There is a lot, and those who attempt to do it, as in my case, are victims of a lot of personal and professional animosity. After all, I'm not naive. I know how some of these extremist people on that side of the fence regard me and my work. They have stooped to some of the most malicious personal attacks, and under the guise of being professional. For example, let me just make one comment in that regard, something that I've challenged numerous times, and that is, in the case of the Forgotten Holocaust, there are Holocaust writers who have deliberately distorted what I said in the book along these lines. Their argument was that Lukas does not draw distinctions between the tragedy of the Poles and the tragedy of the Jews. In other words, they claim wrongly that I pursue a line of absolute equality in the tragedies that both experience. And I reject that, because all one has to do is read the book and go to the afterword, and I very clearly state that I am not drawing absolute equality between the two tragedies. That the Jewish tragedy had a particularity about it that was different, and that the Polish tragedy didn't come up to that level. I do the same thing in my book, Did the Children Cry? I made very clear distinctions. And yet these Holocaust writers, many of them, not all of them, insist on peddling that misinformation. And that misinformation gets into the literature, and obviously I can challenge every time a statement like that is made, because I can't keep up with it. It's passed on as somehow truth. There is, matter of fact, this very distortion is repeated in a recent book it's an anthology that was published under the editorship of Robert Cherry. He's a sociologist. The contributor who makes that statement happens to be a Polish priest who's been sort of co-opted into that line that he repeats. And I challenged him on that. I happened to read the book and wrote him, and he did not have the professional decency to retract it after I called his attention to specific paragraphs in both that book and Did the Children Cry? He also, this very same individual, has peddled a canard about me, and it's going to take a little detail here, but this does give some insight into the problem. He makes the remark that in a draft of a speech that I was supposed to deliver at the U.S. Holocaust Museum many, many years ago, that the language was such that it bordered on anti-Semitism. To my knowledge, no Holocaust historian, Jewish Holocaust historian, has come that far. And when I read that, I almost fell out of the chair. And as it turned out, I couldn't deliver the speech myself. I had a health issue at the time, and I asked a colleague to present that paper for me. And that individual's name is Dr. Thaddeus Gramada, who is now emeritus professor from one of the New Jersey colleges. And I wrote to him about this matter, and he very graciously wrote to the individual, Father Pawlikowski is his name, Pawlikowski, who wrote this in that book. And he challenged him. He said there was absolutely nothing anti-Semitic about that speech. And if it had been, Gramada categorically stated that he wouldn't have delivered it for me. And it's these kinds of canards that sometimes individuals go public with, or they do it sort of sub rosa, to simply, erode your reputation.
Okay. Let me adjust this 1 second, up a little bit. May I ask,
Yeah.
I've interviewed both of the Gypsy and Roma individuals.
Yeah.
Okay, and their position is that that their experience as gypsies, I know you're not an expert on
No,
that realm,
no.
but their argument, and they've got some pretty good details, that they parallel the Jewish experience quite closely. And both of those individuals, and I interviewed them both, are extremely embittered to this day about being the other. Bojena is also embittered about the idea of having the Jewish experience being central, and that counts. And for many Americans, they don't even know that World War II happened. Could you elaborate on those kind of things, please?
Yeah. Can we just pause so I can
Yes,
get some
sir.
more water?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd ask you about the Gypsies and the umbrella of the Holocaust.
Yeah. Well, let me just put it this way. I think one has got to understand that at the time I was writing, that I wrote the Forgotten Holocaust, there was very little in the English language on the subject regarding the Polish tragedy. And I think it's important to get some background here, because I came to this area of study after I had already written 3 books that did not deal with the Polish tragedy. I really made something of a name for myself in the field as a young military historian.
The Holocaust?
No, as an American military historian.
Okay.
I had written about 60 or plus short histories of American Air Force combat groups during World War II. And I worked with 5 other colleagues, and these group histories were put together and published as Air Force combat units of World War II. It was published by the government printing office, and later Franklin Watts, a commercial house, picked it up. And it's had quite a longevity. So my background was military history. From that background, I went back to the university and finished my PhD, and I did a military diplomatic monograph that became published under the title of Eagles East. And I thought that would be the field that I would really spend my time researching and writing. That book, Eagles East, won a national award. The American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics awarded that in the early 70s to me. After completing that book, which incidentally touched on some relatively minor things involving Poland during the war, but actually the book was more of a U.S.-Soviet Union kind of thing, I got interested in the diplomatic side of U.S.-Polish relations during the war. And that resulted in a book called Strange Allies, which was very well received. And as I got deeper into this, I saw in my reading on that book, there was very little that I could get about the Polish tragedy unless I got it through the lens of Jewish Holocaust writers. And when I got into it that way, I saw, well, my goodness, the Polish tragedy is not treated as a separate entity. It is subsumed in the Jewish tragedy, and when the Poles were mentioned, they were always mentioned in a pejorative light. They were either collaborators or they were indifferent, which implies that they could have done something, but didn't. It was always a negative slant to the Polish wartime experience. And I had another book that came out in the meantime called Bitter Legacy, which was really the sequel to The Strange Allies. And already I had been gathering material. And I noticed that the material that was available on Poland during the war was in Polish, which I can read, I do read, but some of that was tainted with sort of the communist line, because remember that we're talking 70s and 80s still, although things liberalized considerably even in that period. Poland was not a typical satellite. And one of the best books that was available at that time really was Norman Davies' God's Playground, which I believe is still the best treatment, survey of Polish history. And so this is how I got into it, from that perspective. So unlike a lot or most Holocaust writers, Jewish Holocaust writers, I didn't start in that area and continued in that area. I came and brought, I think, a broader perspective as a historian of World War II. And I really prefer to be called that because I have a breadth of understanding of the war that I think few of these Jewish Holocaust historians have. And so that's how I happened to get into that. So it isn't that I had such a mission, it's just that I wanted to make available to American readers what the Poles had experienced during World War II. Now, the question inevitably is raised, why did I use the word Holocaust? Now, everyone to this point in time assumed or took for granted that the Holocaust was something Jewish. And I understood that. My concept of the Holocaust, as I got into the research on the Polish experience, and being aware of the experience of other people, I'm not an expert in what the Gypsies had endured or other Slavic people, but I was well aware that the Gypsies had experienced a genocide that was really on the same level as the Jews had. But I mean, who speaks for the Gypsies today? Very few. So my concept of the Holocaust was that it should be more elastic. It does not detract in one iota from the horrendous tragedy the Jewish people endured. I've never claimed it, I don't endorse that, or anything like that. But it should be more of like the experience of the Jews, very particular and unique that it was here. But the other genocides that occurred, and there were many, should be included under the rubric of the Holocaust. And that's why I used the word, to call attention to that. If I had simply used the word the Polish genocide, I don't think it would have received the attention that it did. Unfortunately, the title grabbed readers, grabbed scholars, and the fact that I think I was pretty judicious in how I approached it and did it is revealed by not only the initial reviews, but the book is now going strong after 25 years. And I can say here, I guess for the first time, that one Polish edition already sold out, and I'm now in negotiation through my publisher in the United States for another Polish edition. So any history book that endures that long says something, I think, about the scholarship and about the value of the book.
Okay. What is the prism of the Jewish Holocaust historians? Not all, but most of them. What is their prism? You alluded to a prism.
Yeah, I think they see the Holocaust as essentially a Jewish tragedy, and when they mention others in their discussions, notably the Poles, because after all, most Jews perished in Poland, they take this negative, almost instinctive, pejorative look at the Poles. They can't, there are a few exceptions, but they can't seem to bring themselves to look at Polish-Jewish relations in a more objective light, in a fairer light. And that's basically the prism, I think, that they see the Polish and experience. And they seem to jealously guard this interpretation. It's just sort of an unbending, unwavering thing to many of them. Excuse me, I'm bothering. I guess you'll do a lot of this editing, out coughing and drinking of the water.
Not a problem.
Okay.
What about this issue? It seems to me that the Jewish paradigm, the prism, it's always good and evil in the most starkest terms. And the Jewish community is on the side of good. Or same, and everybody else, everybody, Ukrainians, Poles, everybody, Russians, everybody is anti-Semitic and kind of horizon to horizon. Could you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they have this dichotomy where even though the Poles and others were victims, clearly, of the Nazis, these Holocaust writers tend to emphasize that small minority who were victimizers of Jews. Now, in every society, there is always a small element, a criminal element, who will take advantage of the situation. And in the case of Poland, there were, of course, Poles who collaborated with the Germans. But there were very few of those in comparison to the entire population. I believe it is a recent historian who wrote a book by the name of The Secret City. His name was Paulson. He is Jewish. And he said in the city of Warsaw, for example, now here we're talking about the Polish capital, there were no more than 1,000 to 2,000 Polish collaborators. That's an infinitesimally small percentage of people who collaborated as informers and the like with the Germans. That's a figure, incidentally, that comes close to what I said in my book 25 years ago. So what he said pretty much confirms what I said earlier, and which is a vindication of my research. The fact is, you can't judge a society by its worst elements. It's absolutely patently unfair. Would it be fair for people to judge Israel by their criminal elements and some of the policies that some of their extremists have followed toward Palestine? I think you've got to look at the totality of the society, the totality of the policies, and not this small negative element. And this is the problem, I think, that has to be addressed by Holocaust writers.
Could you, right on the paralleling this, could you address the negative element? In the Jewish community, there were kapos, there were the Judenrat, so-called, and there's a number of things, those who did collaborate with the Germans also. And you don't hear about that too much, as hardly ever in the mainstream. Could you discuss that?
Well, that's absolutely correct. Those elements that had collaborated with the Germans on the Jewish side, of course, it starts with the Judenrats, the Jewish councils. They facilitated the removal of Jewish people from these ghettos to the death camps. They participated in the actual selection process. The Germans left that up to them to determine. You have the Jewish police who did the dirty work for the Germans. You have an organization too that's not mentioned. It's called the Zagev in Warsaw, and these were actually Jewish collaborators who informed on fellow Jews, whoever they were in the pay of the Nazis. It's an organization that was quite strong, and that particular organization, most historians that I've read, I haven't read anyone who's mentioned that organization but me in the Forgotten Holocaust. And yeah.
Could you put that into context, just to save yourself? The point being that you can't judge all Jews on that group in the way that you can't judge all Poles on a criminal element. Could you address that issue?
Yeah, it's obvious. I mean, so if all of this is revealed, as it should be, should that somehow criminalize the Jewish population? No, of course not. You have a criminal element within the Jewish society at the time. You have a criminal element within Polish society, but they're both small in relation to the entire population. Obviously, apparently, many of these Holocaust writers don't feel secure enough to bring up the negative side of Jewish behavior. But why not? I mean, that's not going to indict all of the people by any manner of means.
Do you have any take on Schindler's List? What's your take on that? You've seen it, I presume, the movie?
Yeah, I don't have any particular,
How it portrayed Poles?
Yeah, I could. Perhaps in a broader sense, the depiction of Poles in well, if we focus on depiction of Poles in movies, TV, movies, and others, and there's a long list of them. There are other people who have addressed this more thoroughly than I could here, but going way back to the so-called documentary on the Holocaust by Gerald Green. At the time I was writing The Forgotten Holocaust, and carrying that up through presentations like QB7, Shoah, and those movies. Invariably, the depiction of the Poles, of course, was always negative, and always either indifferent or collaborationist. And the only movie that I can think of in recent times that attempted to balance that out was The Pianist, which depicted several Poles in a very favorable light, and as well as a German officer who couldn't bring himself to buy into that with completeness to that Nazi ideology regarding the Jews. But yes, the Poles, I think, have gotten a pretty bad rap in the movies, but let's face it, the Poles have also gotten a bad rap in the media, in the press. To this day, routinely, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, major newspapers still refer to Polish concentration camps. This is what, 65 plus years since this event? And they don't know the difference between a German concentration camp and this chimera that they invented, a Polish concentration camp? And I noticed just recently that the Wall Street Journal, with great fanfare, announced that it's informed its editors to refrain from referring to the concentration and death camps in Poland as Polish. Now, you would think responsible journalism would have gotten the message a long time ago to correctly describe what these camps were. This feeds into this public notion in this country that, yeah, the Poles were collaborators, informers, and on the Jews, and were pro-Nazi and anti-Semitic and all the rest of it.
So how does America, well, let me ask you, is the American public subjected to a systemic bias here, do you think? If so,
absolutely.
Why, how, elaborate?
Well, I think there's a, they're being bombarded by movies such as I just enumerated. The story of the Poles in the major American media do not allow for any opening for a more objective point of view regarding Poles and other people. Their tragedies just don't get anywhere near equal time or even part-time. There are very few books. If you look at the proliferation of books on World War II, the Holocaust of the Jews ranks front and center. How many books in this country have been published on the Polish wartime tragedy since my book first came out in 1986. As far as I know, there is only one other major book that covers the Polish Holocaust, and that's by Professor Piotrowski, that came out years later. Contrast that with the monumental amount of stuff that has come out on the Jewish wartime experience. I mean, there's just no contest. Let me parenthetically say something else, which I think is really destructive for the long term. It's already been destructive, but if it isn't corrected, we're going to have even further problems with a more objective view of what went on during World War II regarding these other non-Jewish people. Pause for a minute. A sociologist recently came out, and I might know the fact that he is a Jewish sociologist, came out with a study. He had surveyed Jewish professors, and what was revealing here, and now remember, Jewish professors are the primary teachers of courses on the Holocaust and the Holocaust era. And astonishingly, a huge percentage of them, I don't want to quote a figure because I may be wrong, but I know it was huge, admitted to their anti-Polish prejudices. Now, if somebody's admitting to this prejudice, one can only surmise, this isn't really brain surgery here, deduce the fact, what presentations do they give about non-Jews in their courses? It follows that the Poles, other Slavs, and the Gypsies are going to get short shrift in those courses. Now, these are the major teachers of these courses in the major universities of the United States. Further indicator of how much trouble we are in this area of history. Now, the only way that can be countered is by opening up doors and windows, let some fresh air in. After all, we're supposed to be committed to the academic goal. I'm still naive enough to believe we're supposed to be after historical truth. And the only way to achieve that is to allow others like me to come into the arena here and be heard at various forums, through various publishing outlets, etc. My experience after the book came out, there were some Holocaust historians who naturally objected to what I had said. Some didn't like my use of the term Holocaust, but I've explained why I did it. They misrepresented what I said in the book by saying I drew absolute parity between the two experiences, Jewish and non-Jewish, which was false. And I lost my train of thought. Let me pick up there. I don't want to.
I edit this, so it's not an issue. We're not on live TV.
Yeah. I just I digress and then I forget what the hell I was saying. Let me try to pick up on this. Oh. Regarding the subject of forums. After this book came out and received some criticism from many of these Holocaust writers, I noticed that one would normally have expected a book of that stature and an author of a book like that would have been invited to a lot of these Holocaust meetings and forums and so on. And what was quite conspicuous here was that the invitations to those groups were non-existent. So apparently I was declared persona non grata in that sector. Now that didn't bother me because I think, thank God, we have a big country. And everything isn't done on the Eastern Seaboard necessarily at Ivy League schools and related schools, nor on the West Coast. I was gratified that I received more invitations than I could really accept from universities and colleges in the midsection of the United States. And I don't want to frame this discussion absolutely in terms of a dichotomy between Jewish historians and non-Jewish historians. Although some of that existed, yes, but I want to say right now that there were several Jewish historians who invited me to their campuses, and I would say at considerable personal risk to their positions there, their tenure possibilities or promotions and what have you, because they clung to the ideal that I have, that we should be hearing all views, and after all, whatever a historian does, what he's doing is kind of opening up he's offering a partial view, essentially, of the truth. And that's all we can hope to do. It would be pretty presumptuous and arrogant for any one of us to claim, well, this is it. This is the absolute truth, and I don't want to hear your point of view. And I think if we really had a truly open academic exchange, that we would modify the prevailing view of the Holocaust and include these other folks who were also had their own tragedies, victims of their own genocides. And I think we would enlarge our understanding and get closer to that elusive goal of the truth. But right now, the way things are, it's extremely difficult to do that. So I have been invited to, for example, one school stands out, and I have to give you this example. This was at Millersville State University in Pennsylvania. I believe it's part of the University of Pennsylvania system. And at the time, I was teaching at Wright State University in Ohio. And I was delighted by the invitation, and I was given a primary berth, as it were, because I was going to give the keynote address. And I gave the speech, and it was to a packed auditorium, mostly students, but the faculty, history faculty, were seated right in the front row, along, no doubt, with faculty from other departments. And when I finished the speech, two things happened, which were rather astonishing. I got a standing ovation from the students. I haven't received many of those. And most of the Jewish professors in the front rows got up and left. Now, they were courteous enough to stay to the end of the speech, but that was the end of it. Not one of them said, "Thank you for coming. I don't agree with everything you said, but thank you for your time and airing your views," which I thought really sums up the problem that we're discussing here. Another situation that developed occurred at Florida State University, my alma mater. I was already retired, and a Jewish professor who headed the Holocaust Studies program there invited me up to Tallahassee to give a presentation. It was particularly poignant for me personally because the man I studied under, my mentor, Dr. Earl Beck, was still living, although in failing health, and he was living at the time in Tallahassee. So my wife and I picked him up at his home and drove him to the assembly, and I gave my presentation. Well, I've encountered this in other forums where there will always be someone, one or two people, who will take issue with what I've had to say. And I always listen to them respectfully and try to respond civilly to them. And usually some of them have such die-hard views, there's no way of making converts of them. But that's usually been the way it has gone. But at this forum, in addition to several Jewish folks getting up and leaving, there was one who really got very emotional. So much so he didn't make any sense at all. But I tried to calm him and respond, and he finally sat down. But what was interesting about this program was after it concluded, I didn't realize it at the time, but there were a number of secondary school teachers there. Apparently this was part of their returning to the university to upgrade their credentials, add additional credits or what have you. And there must have been 30 or 40 of them there. And after the program was over, I would say at least half or more, 2/3 my wife says, came up to me, thanked me for the presentation, and I heard this over and over at every university that I had given a speech. It happened again here at Florida State. Professor Lukas, we never heard about the Polish tragedy. When we heard about it, the Poles were always labeled collaborators of the Germans. It is so refreshing to hear this point of view. They were so eager to learn more about not only the Polish tragedy, there was very little, and they're absolutely right in this, on the Gypsy experience. There are some good books. Ian Hancock's is an excellent source. But I noticed recently that Gunther Levy wrote a book recently challenging the very idea that the Gypsies were victims of genocide. That trash gets published readily. But these students, both college age and mature students, were just so grateful to hear something else. And they hammered me with questions about sources, books they could read in addition to mine. And this shows I think rather graphically, the problems that we have in this area.
Could you address what my term was, and Professor Chodakiewicz discussed this a little bit too.
Yeah.
The idea of walking on eggshells when you're talking about the Jew, the word Jew, if you use it in any sense, you're in danger. I mean, or
Yeah.
the issue of that.
Well, I think yes. I think people today, particularly those that are still employed in academia, they are indeed walking on eggshells, in that they parse their language so carefully when they get into this area of Polish-Jewish relations particularly, because it's still a dynamite issue. And what I've been arguing for is to diffuse this. Now, if you've got tenure considerations you've got issues of advancement, and you're in a certain academic environment like where Jewish professors could do you harm, who feel strongly about this, then one can understand that to some degree. I can't tell you how many telephone calls and letters, I wish I had saved some of these letters, from colleagues who you would probably recognize by name. Many of them are of Polish background, American professors of Polish heritage, who have said, Dick, I think you did a great job. I support what you said, but I can't go public. I have heard that time and time again. So there are those, I think, that, and let me just illustrate with one additional anecdote on that point. I remember I was at a program at Catholic University in New York, and there was a professor there who endorsed my book strongly. I autographed the book for him at his request. And I can't get too personal here, but he went on to other bigger and better things professionally. But I noticed the further he went up the ladder, as it were, the less he wanted to have anything to do with me, because I was tainted. And I find, you know, I'm just as sensitive as anybody else, but I thought I had had some sort of relationship of confidence with him and mutual respect, and you can't help but get saddened by that kind of behavior, or whatever the reasons are. And very often, people like me, and I'm sure I can't speak for them, but Piotrowski and Professor Hodakevich feel quite isolated in this kind of environment, that you're embattled, that you're in guarding some fortress or something, you know what I mean? And that's not the way it should be. It's not the way it should be. So it's, you know, here I've been at it a good part of my life, and as I said at the introduction, I worked in diplomatic history for many years before I got into the subject of Poland during World War II and the relations between Poles and Jews. But I never remember the level of personal animosity and professional ostracization that some of these people conduct. We had some we had some big debates in the 1970s and early 80s when I was in the field of diplomatic history, and the big issue concerning the origins of the Cold War. And I went to many of those historical meetings, participated in them, but I never remember that level of personal attack or professional disgrace that these people try to put you in.
This is important too. The issue of, you touch on in your book, the issue of Jews, quote, some Jews in the Soviet occupation as a cause, a partial cause of anti-Semitism.
Okay.
You just said, that's been rolled over, very few people understand it.
Yeah, let me just...
Don't forget you've got that right there.